Welcome friends. Today I would like to explore John Keats' poem sonnet, The Poetry of Earth. Before going deep into discussion about the poem The Poetry of Earth, which was originally titled On the Grasshopper and the Cricket, I would like to give a kind of a synopsis of Keats's biography, his facts about his life. Let us begin with his death. The epitaph of Keats was written by Keats himself, and this reads, the epitaph of Keats reads, "This grave contains all that is mortal of a young English poet who on his deathbed, in the bitterness of his heart, at the malicious power of his enemies, desired these words to be engraved on his tombstone." Engraved on his tombstone. Here lies one whose name was writ in water. Here lies one whose name was writ in water, 24th February 1821. So, friends, Keats believed that when he was at his deathbed, that his works will not be remembered by the future generations. This is suggested by his expression, "Here lies one whose name was written in water." Something written in water will be wiped away, destroyed in a very short time. But despite Keats' belief that his works will not be immortal, his poems and other works will not be immortal, if you search Google, just writing down the word Keats, you will have thousands of 50,000 articles on Keats at the moment. This suggests how Keats is popular today. Now, coming back to Keats' life, Keats was born in 1795, 31st October 1795 in London. He came of a very middle class family. Now 1795 is birth year. 1814 gives up his surgeon apprenticeships. 1816 publishes his first poem. 1820 moves to Italy to improve health. 1821 dies in Rome. 1821, 23rd February, dies in Rome. So you can see from this year, you will find that Keats lived only for 25 years. Little more than 25 years. He died at a very tender age of 25. And even more surprising is that his last 4 years was the most prolific, was the most creative, was the most remarkable annal in the history of English literature. And I would like to remind you that Keats life, it is well said by a critic that Keats' life was always haunted by death. Keats' father died when he was only 8, and his mother died when he was 14. And Keats' brother Tom, younger brother, died in 1818 when Keats was 1795 to 1818. Keats was 23. And when Keats published his first poem in the Examiner, which was published in the Examiner of Leigh Hunt's magazine, Leigh Hunt and Shelley and Byron and others were a remarkable literary friends of Keats. They formed a group, and this group was radical group. They were very much critical about the activities of the British government at that time. So, but his remarkable literary friendship with Leyhand and others, these poets, Leyhand and others, inspired Keats to write poetry. Despite the fact that Keats was finding it very much difficult to sustain his life, because he was very much in need of money then. Keats' first poem was published in 1816, and as Keats record in his writing, that when his first poem was published, some 12 friends and read it enthusiastically, and some 2 other familiar, not so familiar persons read it not so enthusiastically. But when Keats published his second book, Endymion, a 4,000 line and kind of a epic romance, it was brutally brutally criticized by the then leading magazines of the time. Quarterly Review and Blackwood's magazines. These 2 influential magazines assaulted, brutally attacked Keats' work, and some quipped. The editor of these magazines suggested that Keats should go back to his medical apprenticeship, medical professions, instead of writing poetry. So Keats' Endymion was brutally attacked by the influential magazines of the time. The editors of the magazine found out that Keats was a medical student at a certain point of his time. They suggested that Keats should go back to his medical professions and sell pills and medicines and ointments instead of writing poetry. And they also scathingly said that it is better to be a starved apothecary than to be a starved poet. So this was a very severe criticism, brutal, heartbreaking criticism for Keats. Though Keats denied that that such kind of criticism had no effect for him, but such criticism to some extent had an adverse effect on his health. So if you look at Keats' life, you will find that his life was full of difficulties, sorrows and sufferings. Within the age of 14, 15, he lost his parents to tuberculosis. His brother also died, and his hopeless love for Fanny Brown was also a kind of a tragic thing in his life. But despite all these personal crises that Keats was going through, Keats had an ambition. Keats was dedicated to poetry, to beauty. He kept on championing poetry in such a difficult and drastically adverse circumstances. His last 4 years was a remarkable years time in the history of English literature. Our poem today, The Poetry of Art, this poem was written on 31st December 1816, and it was published in Leyhand's magazine, his friend Leyhand's magazine, The Examiner. And if you think of the context, the occasion of the poem, the biographical context of the poem, we'll see that this poem was a product of Keats' competition was Leyhand. Leyhand proposed a theme on the grasshopper and the cricket, and both these persons, Keats and Leyhand, began to write a sonnet on the grasshopper and the cricket, and Keats composed this poem within 15 minutes, suggesting a kind of a huge genius that he was. And Leyhand was very much appreciative of these sonnets, and when he first read these sonnets after Keats has finished this poem, he remarked about the first line, that such a prosperous beginning. And when he came at the 8th and 9th line, he said that Keats' bravo, perfect. So Leyhand was very much enthusiastic about these sonnets. The Poetry of Art, this was not the original title. The original title was On the Grasshopper and Cricket. Now, before going into the technicalities of this particular poem, let us have a quick look and quick reading of the text, the Poetry of Art, or originally titled The Grasshopper and the Cricket. The Poetry of Art is never dead. When all birds are faint to the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run from hedge to hedge about the new mown maid. That is the grasshopper. He takes the lead in summer luxury. He has never done with his delights, for when tired out with fun, he rests at ease beneath some pleasant weed. The Poetry of Art is ceasing never. On a lone winter evening, when the frost has brought silence, from the stove there thrills the cricket song, in warmth increasing ever, and seems to one in drowsiness half lost, the grasshoppers among some grassy hills. So this is the poem. Keats once remarked in one of his letters that a poem to a poet is never a telling, it is a discovery. Such statement can be applicable in case of the Poetry of Art also. It is a discovery to the poet Keats. He, like a seasoned philosopher, found out a deep truth that our nature, Mother Earth, is always full of music, be it the scorching heat of the summer, or be it the chilly, cold winter. The music of art, the music of nature continues. And you'll see that the theme, the central preoccupation, the central theme, the central message of the poem, the main message of the poem, central theme of the poem is foregrounded in the first line of the poem. The Poetry of Art is never dead. The Poetry of Art is always continues. And the same theme is also foregrounded, central theme, the central preoccupation. The Poetry of Art is ceasing never. Almost the similar wording, and two words are different, but the message is the same. So the central message, the central theme, or the central preoccupation of this poem, the Poetry of Art, that the art is always full of music, in every time, in every setting, and in every season. Now let us have a quick line by line analysis of the poem. The Poetry of Art is never dead. And now Keats, by the word poetry, Keats here symbolizes or means the music of art. So the music of art is never dead. Music of art is always alive, is always thriving, is always alive. Music of art means nature, world's music is always alive, always continues. And this is the central message. This is the thesis statement. And this statement, the central message, is illustrated through exemplifications. This is the central message. This is the central message, and this message is illustrated through exemplifications. Now Keats explained this truth by giving example of the grasshopper in the summer season. Now what he says, when all the birds are faint to the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run. Keats, this is the setting of this is summer season, when all the birds are faint to the hot sun. When the birds, the celebrated birds of a summer, like the skylark or the nightingale, they are faint, they are exhausted, they are very tired with the hot sun. They are very tired, exhausted in the scorching heat of the sun, in the copper sun. When the birds are exhausted, when the birds are tired, when the birds are very tired in the scorching heat of the sun, and they hide in cooling trees. They take rest in cooling trees, in the cool shade of trees, in the cool shade of the leafy branches of trees. They hide, they take rest. When all the birds take rest in the cooling shade of trees, still then, even then, at that time, the voice of earth remains alive.